Alright, the title of the story is called The King's Magic Drum. There once was a king named Ephraim Duke. He was an ancient king of Calabar. And the king was a very rich man. He had hundreds of farmlands and hundreds of servants. And he even had 50 wives and lots of children. He was a man of peace. He hated war. So, one of the things that the king had in his possession to help keep the peace was a magic drum. Whenever it was beaten, the drum would bring as much food and drink as the king wanted. So when any of their countries wanted to fight the king, instead of fighting with the king would call all of his enemies together, and the enemies would be amazed because instead of a fight, they saw a feast before them with all these wonderful foods like cooked yams, okra, fufu, soups, and palm wine. Well, it was all because of the magic drum. Whenever he would beat it, all of the food would be there for all of the guests. Well, his enemies. And when his enemies got nice and full and fat, he would send them back to their countries, and they wouldn't want to fight him anymore. But there was one drawback to the magic drum. If the owner of the drum happened to walk, where's my stick? Over a stick in the road or over a fallen tree, then immediately that would break the juju of the drum and the magic would be gone for the good food. Instead of good food, it would all turn bad. And instead of the good food and drink that would come, 300 Igbo soldiers would come with whips and they would beat the owner of the drum and all of the people that were there with him. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It was bad. On occasion, the king would invite all of the subjects that he had to a feast, just so that he could enjoy his kingdom. He even invited the wild animals to come, like the hippo, the leopard, the antelope, the bush cows. And the reason why he could do that is because back in those days, the animals were friendly with man, and at a feast they would not kill each other. And all of his subjects, including the animals, were envious of the king. They wanted the king's magic drum, but the king would never part with it. Well, one morning, one of the king's wives by the name of Ikor-Idam took her little girl down to the spring to bathe her. And over the spring, there was a palm tree. And up in the palm tree, there was the tortoise, who was gathering palm nuts for his lunch. Well, while he was trying to cut down the palm nuts, one of them accidentally fell to the ground, and the little girl found it, and when she saw it, she said, "Mom, Mom!" And once her mother saw what she was pointing to, she quickly grabbed up the palm nut and gave it to her daughter, and her daughter ate it. Well, the tortoise saw this overhead from up in the tree, and he decided that this was what he was going to make a big fuss to the king about, because after all, this would be his chance to get the king's magic drum by forcing him to give it to him by tattletelling on what the daughter did. So basically, when the tortoise came down the tree, he approached the mother and said, "You know, I am a poor man. All I did was climb this tree to get this lunch for me and my family so we can have food, but you stole my palm nut, gave it to your daughter, and she ate it. I'm going to let the king know about this, because after all, when you steal, that is a criminal offense. And the king is not going to like it when he hears that one of his wives did this. Well, the mother replied back to the tortoise, I did not steal your palm nut. I thought it had simply fallen to the ground. So, when my daughter asked for it, I picked it up and I gave it to her, and then she ate it. But if you have a complaint against me and my child, I will take you to the king, for he is a very rich man, and he will compensate you for your loss. So with that, she finished bathing her daughter in the spring, and then she took Tortoise to the king and told the king everything that had happened. Well, the king was more than willing to give Tortoise something in replacement for what he had lost. So he offered the tortoise some money. But the tortoise said, oh no, I don't want that. So then the king offered clothing for the lost food. But the tortoise said, oh no, I don't want that. Then the king offered palm oil to the tortoise to compensate him for the lost pine nut. And what do you think? Palm nut. And what do you think the tortoise said in reply? Oh no, I don't want that either. So finally the king was like, well, what do you want? And guess what he pointed to? He wanted the king's magic drum. This was his chance. So the king said, very well, you may have the drum. But the king never told the tortoise about what would happen if the owner of the drum walked over a stick in the road or a fallen tree. Because remember, that would break the juju of the drum. And then instead of fine food and drink, 300 Igbo soldiers would come and they would beat the owner of the drum and whoever was with him. So, upon this, the turtle was so excited, he rushed home to his wife and his kids, and he said, woohoo, I'm a rich man now. I'm not going to work anymore in my life because I have the king's magic drum. I have obtained the king's magic drum. And when I beat this drum, as much food and drink as I want will come to me. And his family, who was hungry at the time, said, well, beat it. Let's get some food. So, the tortoise beat the drum just like he had seen the king do. And immediately, as much food and drink as they could possibly want showed up right before their eyes. And they pigged out. They enjoyed a wonderful feast. Well, this went on for 3 whole days. He and his wife got fatter and fatter, and so did his children, because they were enjoying all the food they could possibly want. Well, Tortoise became very proud. He wanted to show off the drum even more. So he sent out invitations to the king and all of the kingdom, inviting them to a feast. But when the people got the invitations, they laughed. Ha! We know Tortoise is poor. We're not going over there. So only a few people showed up to the feast. And when they showed up, they were not disappointed. There was food everywhere. There was so much food and drink that after the feast, they told all their friends and family, boy, did you miss a feast? I had so much food, I almost popped. And they made all of the other people who hadn't shown up so sad. The people that didn't show up were regretting the fact that they refused the invitation. Okay? So, what ended up happening was he started becoming more famous and regarded as a rich man by the people instead of a poor tortoise man. The only person, though, who knew about the true source of the food was the king. Right. Well, what ended up happening was 3 weeks went by. And Tortoise began to get lazier and lazier. In fact, he got so lazy he stopped working altogether, because all he had to do was just beat the drum to get what he wanted. Well, he started drinking too much palm wine. And one day, he was drinking so much palm wine away from his home. When he was on his way to get back, he was staggering and stumbling, trying to get home. And because he was so drunk, he didn't realize what was in the road. A stick. And he stumbled over the stick because he was so drunk. Well, that immediately broke the juju of the drum. But nothing had happened because the tortoise hadn't beaten the drum. So he didn't realize that the juju of the drum had been broken. Well, when he got home that night and called everybody for dinner, just like they had done normally, he beat the drum. Only this time, instead of all the food and all of the drink appearing, guess what happened? 300 Igbo soldiers came with whips and chains and beat them all. The tortoise and all his family. Well, the tortoise was very upset. And he said to himself, "Oh no, wait a minute. I give a feast out of the goodness of my heart to the whole kingdom. And instead of beating the drum and getting food, my family and I get beaten by Igbo men? Oh, that is not happening. If this is to be my fate, then all of the kingdom will share my fate too." So that night he sent out another round of invitations. And this time when the people got their invitation, they were sure to show up. But they did not realize that the tortoise had sent his family away to hiding so that they wouldn't get beaten by the Igbo men. They also didn't realize that Tortoise was planning to hide himself as well. So his house was full of people waiting for food and feasting. He made sure all the doors were bolted and locked so they couldn't escape, including the animals. And then he beat the drum and ran off and hid. And just like what happened before, 300 Igbo soldiers came and they had whips and they started beating the guests violently for 2 hours. Well, Tortoise was very satisfied at everybody else's beating. But the people were not satisfied with Tortoise because only one animal was able to escape out of the whole crowd, and that was the leopard. Well, after that, the people were so angry at Tortoise that they were threatening him. And since Tortoise did not want to endure any injury to himself or his family, he decided enough is enough. I am going to take this drum back to the king tomorrow. And that next morning, he went to the king and he said, "Oh, king, I am not satisfied with the performance of this drum. I need for you to exchange it for something else. I'll take anything. Money, clothing, I'll even accept some servants. But only give me what I want in order for you to take this drum back." Well, the king refused to meet the tortoise's request. After all, when the king offered those things to the tortoise at first, he was so greedy he didn't even want those things. So, the king said, "I will not do what you have asked, but since I do feel sorry for you and your family, I will present to you this magic fufu tree." And upon hearing that, the tortoise was so grateful, and he decided not to be greeted. that he accepted gladly the magic foo-foo tree and decided to be content from that time forward. The